My name is Mike Frisch from Baylor University. With me today is Joe Sirgy, management psychologist and professor of marketing at Virginia Tech. Joe is a preeminent researcher in the field of well-being. And to start us off today, Joe, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about where you grew up.
Oh, where I grew up. Interesting. I grew up in Cairo, Egypt, and Beirut, Lebanon. So, yeah, my parents are Lebanese, Syrian, Greek. And I just happened to be born in Egypt. And I spent my formative years between Cairo and Beirut. And then I immigrated to the United States after that.
And can you tell me what it was like growing up in these countries and why you happened to leave and move on?
It was growing up in Egypt before the 1967 war with Israel was a little bit difficult in the sense that there was a lot of turmoil in the country because of the Arab-Israeli war. And then when I left Egypt to go to Lebanon, again we had the same situation. We had the civil war in Lebanon, and so we managed to try and get away from all the chaos, and ultimately that's why we came to the States.
And how old were you when you came to the States?
18 years old.
Okay. So before 18 in your childhood, what kind of hobbies and interests did you have?
I was very much involved in the sciences. I loved to do all kinds of things from chemistry, biology, electronics. So at one point I actually put together a transistor radio. I got involved with photography. I made soap. All kinds of. So I had a chemistry set that I used to, put it to good use, and so that was fun when I was growing up doing all these science projects. So I grew up with a sort of a science frame of mind.
And it sounds like your parents maybe insulated you from some of the unrest that was going around. Is that fair to say, or they supported your interests?
They supported my interests, but I'm not sure exactly how they managed to insulate us, because it was very difficult to become so insular in a situation like that.
Yes.
Yes. Right.
So how did you pursue your science and interest, and what kind of schools did you go to?
I went to an Irish Catholic school, and that's where I essentially learned my English, and it was a private parochial school. I learned a whole lot from the Irish fathers, especially their discipline. I remember that they would carry around this big black beauty, they call it.
Oh my gosh.
Which is a stick.
Okay.
And they managed to be very forceful in the way they disciplined the kids back then.
How about the academics? Was that good?
Yeah, the academics was excellent. Yeah, so
and
it was.
What order of priests was this? Or sisters?
Jesuits.
Jesuits, okay,
Yeah,
great.
Right, yeah.
Well, so tell me a little bit about your parents, their background, and...
My dad is essentially, he came from, he was raised and went to school in Beirut, Lebanon. And my mom, although she was her side of the family came from Syria. This is so on my mom's side, she's Greek Orthodox, and from my dad's side, he's Greek Catholic. So I'm sort of a blend between Greek Catholics and Greek Orthodox. Yeah.
Very interesting. What was their attitude about education?
Education was very important. So in the context of our family and the way I was raised, education is a first priority. So you have to be educated in the best way possible, and no costs spared. So education comes before anything else.
And I'm sorry?
Top priority.
Can you tell me what kind of business your parents were in, and what got them from Greece to Egypt?
Originally, from my dad's side, they came to Egypt to establish a textile operation. So from my dad's side, they were able to establish a textile distributorship. And from my mom's side of the family, they put together a textile manufacturing operation. Back then, in the early part of the 20th century, cotton, the Egyptian cotton was very popular. It was essentially a prime commodity of Egypt. That's how they were attracted to go to Egypt and essentially, set up a textile operation. So from my dad's side, it was, creating that distributorship, and from my mom's side, it was the manufacturing of textile made out of cotton.
So you had role models for, is it fair to say, business, even entrepreneurship? Were they fairly enterprising?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And willing to uproot themselves to a degree.
Something about especially the Lebanese, is they have a tendency to go where the money is.
Very enterprising.
Very enterprising. Yeah. The Lebanese, they trace their heritage all the way back to the Phoenicians, and again, the Phoenicians, think of themselves as being the traders.
Yes.
So they go wherever the trade takes them to.
Very good. And what is the exact ethnicity of each of your parents?
In that part of the Middle East, your ethnicity is defined by religion, and therefore from my mom's side, essentially it's a Greek Orthodox that traces their heritage to Greece, and from my dad's side, it's a Greek Catholic that they trace their heritage to the Syrians, the ancient Christian Syrians that you can actually go back to what they call the Melkites. The Melkites are a direct descendants of Jesus and his tribe. So.
But you said this Lebanese enterprising spirit rubbed off on them somehow, even though they were not Lebanese.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Well, yeah. Well, back in the old, they are Lebanese.
Okay, that's what I meant.
Yeah, back in the old days, Lebanon and Syria used to be one country.
Okay.
And the distinction between Lebanon and Syria was not in existence. In Arabic, they call it Bilad-i-Sham. Bilad-i-Sham meaning the greater countries of the north. And so the distinction between Lebanon and Syria, that is essentially an artificial distinction that was created by the French when the French colonized Lebanon and Syria, and they created this division between the two countries, and so it's an artificial division between these two countries. The language is the same, the culture is the same, so the Syrians do not distinguish themselves from the Lebanese and vice versa.
Well, thank you for educating me about that, and it sounds like their original, what age were they when they moved to Egypt from Greece?
Well, Greece, yeah, the Greek heritage part of them is further back.
Okay.
So it's not that
So they were born and raised where?
they were born and raised in Syria,
Okay.
and in Egypt. So from my mom's side, she was also born in Egypt. My dad was born in this case actually he was born in Egypt, but he was raised in Beirut, which is a little confusing. Yes. And so he went back and forth between Beirut and Cairo because of his education, and then when he got involved in business, then essentially he settled in Egypt, in Cairo.
So what would you say sparked your interest in psychology and business marketing and things like that?
Well, it's when I first arrived in the United States, I got drafted. And in the military, I was assigned to a military intelligence unit. And in military intelligence, our assignment was to work with the POWs. And part of this assignment was to help the POWs resist communist indoctrination.
Very psychological.
Right. So we tried to help them by creating those mock-up situations in which they would be subjected to communist interrogation, and we were teaching them how to inoculate themselves psychologically to be able to resist interrogation. So I got so much involved in interrogation methods and psychological techniques of persuasion, and so I thought that was fascinating. So the more I got into it, the more I thought, psychology is really a fascinating subject, so I got into that. But then I realized, started looking at the bigger questions, and I became very interested in philosophy. But the more I got into philosophy and psychology, the more I realized that many of the philosophical questions can be addressed psychologically.
Yes, yes.
In psychological terms.
Yes.
So I really delved more into psychology. So right after the military, I went to UCLA, and essentially my first degree was in psychology. And from that, my first job was a personnel analyst, a job interviewer. So I was employed by the California Unemployment Department. And I was helping people find jobs and that kind of thing. So it involved a lot of interviewing and trying to address people's needs and that kind of thing. And after that, I realized that, I need something a little more intellectually challenging. So I went back to graduate school, and I got involved in again, my master's degree was in psychology, more specifically in experimental psychology. I got the master's degree from Long Beach State. And then after that, I went to University of Massachusetts, and this is where I did my PhD in social personality industrial psychology. So it's a combination of three things.
And University of Massachusetts at
Amherst.
At Amherst, okay. Now, were these Vietnam era soldiers you were working with?
Yes.
Were you in Vietnam per se, or did you do your work in stateside?
Initially, I was right after boot camp. I was getting prepared to go to Vietnam. As a matter of fact, I was en route to go to Vietnam, and this was back in 1972. 1971 or 72. I think it was 72 probably early part of 72. And this is when Nixon started negotiating the peace treaty.
The war was winding down.
Exactly. So they started calling back the troops from Vietnam.
Oh my gosh.
So, I was in transition to go to Vietnam. I ended up in Hawaii, and this is where they had in Oahu, they have a training camp for POWs to help them with resisting interrogation and that kind of thing. So this is where I ended up in Hawaii, and so in one way, I was blessed not to go to Vietnam, but on the other hand, I was ready to go to Vietnam. Yeah.
So, well, that's very interesting. Now, tell me who inspired you in terms of your graduate school, either Long Beach or Massachusetts. What inspired you there?
Well, when I got involved in psychology, and as I mentioned, many of the philosophical questions about good life and good living, I thought...
Did you have coursework in philosophy?
Yes, I did, yeah.
At UCLA?
At UCLA, yes. And before UCLA, while I was doing the military, I was, doing my term in the military, I took courses in Hawaii, at Oahu, at the University of Hawaii, as well as there's another Catholic college by the name of Chaminade College. So I took a bunch of courses there. So by the time I got out of the service, I was halfway through my bachelor's degree.
I see.
Right. Yeah. So I took a bunch of courses, and I took a lot of those tests that gave me AP credits.
I see. And you had this kind of philosophy bug, and then you translated into some psychology interest in coursework at UCLA.
Right.
Got your master's in experimental psychology from Long Beach State. Anything there that prompted you to go on that made it interesting to you, experimental psychology?
Well, I was very much interested not in experimental psychology in the physiological sense.
Yes.
A lot of experimental psychologists define themselves as being Skinnerians or rat psychologists.
Yes, animal learning.
Learning, and that was not the case. I was very much interested in social psychology.
And there were social psychologists at Long Beach?
Oh, yes.
Good.
Right, yeah. And so social psychology was something that was fascinating. And now, while I was at Long Beach State, I was exposed to marketing. And I realized that, much of consumer psychology was nothing but social psychology, social personality psychology. So I got very much interested in that. So when I ended up going to University of Massachusetts, my dissertation was on the self-concept. It deals with personality.
Yes.
But it was embedded, it was contextualized in trying to predict how consumers make decisions about specific brands as a function of their self-concept. So we talk about self-image congruence. The extent to which the brand image, the personality of a particular product or brand fits the self-concept in terms of the actual self, the ideal self, the social self, that kind of thing. And how do you measure that? How do you capture that by an index? And ultimately, how that index predict a whole bunch of what you call consumer behaviors, from brand preference to consumer satisfaction to something like customer loyalty, and then looking at the different mediators, why why self-image congruence would predict this. So the mediator related to different types of self-concept motives, such as self-esteem, such as social approval, such as self-consistency. Those needs, those motivational tendencies were considered to be the mediators. And ultimately, you can actually think of under what conditions would something like the match between the actual self and the brand image would be more predictive of something like brand preference rather than, or at least compared to the match between the brand image and the ideal self. And so, what are those moderators that would help us, better understand and better predict those dependent variables? So that I launched from that point. I launched a program of research based on my dissertation, based on the self-concept, and then eventually the self-concept took me to aspects of well-being. So we got into doing research on the extent to which the consumers would identify, their identity would become so linked with a particular product that it really enhances their satisfaction to the point that customer satisfaction spills over on life satisfaction.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So let's say, for example, a car. When you buy a car, well, a car is not necessarily something that is trivial, but it can really enrich your life if it is connected to your identity in terms of self-concept, to the point where that whatever satisfaction that one may experience with the consuming that product will spill over to other life domains. Ultimately, it will again contribute to life satisfaction. So from that vantage point, the self-concept led me into creating metrics of transportation well-being, housing well-being, health care, and metrics related to well-being and health care. So there were a lot of products and services in which we created metrics for that, again, would capture the concept of well-being. That was induced from my earlier studies related to the self-concept.
So you and John Watson, it sounds like a similar kind of career path where you studied experimental and social psychology, but looked at the interface and application to marketing and business.
Exactly.
So was this your idea? Did you have mentors in this? There's not a lot of social psychology programs that have savvy business people. Where'd you get the idea?
That's a good question. I don't have the slightest idea where I got the idea. It just happened, I guess, and I went with it.
Well, it's very creative, and to do that on your own without a major professor who's plowed that field many times, it doesn't sound like you had that.
Well, my mentor at University of Massachusetts, essentially the chairperson of my dissertation committee, was Seymour Epstein. And Seymour Epstein is a very famous personality, social psychologist. And he's very well grounded in self-concept. So I learned a lot from him. But in terms of taking it to well-being and applying it, developing the metrics of well-being in different contexts, it just happened.
Well, it's very creative.
Yeah.
And you had no real marketing coursework or background?
I did. At University of Massachusetts, I took a whole bunch of courses in management and marketing. So I had the option to essentially after getting my PhD, I had the option to go to the psychology department or the School of Business, and I ended up at Virginia Tech in the Department of Business Administration before it was split into management and marketing. And in the Department of Business Administration, in essence, I had I was doing research on both management as well as marketing, because I did a lot of stuff on what you call employee well-being. And employee well-being was also very much grounded in management rather than marketing. So I did both. I did both. But unfortunately, the Department of Business Administration at Virginia Tech was split between marketing and management, and therefore, you know, these, when you reach a certain level, again, those departments become silos. And so I had to make a choice: marketing management, psychology. You know, so I ended up in marketing because I did a lot more in marketing than management. So, but you know, inherently I'm an disciplinarian. So I feel not very happy about the fact that I'm in this one silo, because I'm in a whole bunch of other silos, and I appreciate the multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary aspect of social and behavioral sciences much more so than anybody.
Well, it's a frustration in universities because everyone's in their own little fiefdom by discipline, and it gets in the way of interdisciplinary work.
Absolutely. And this is not necessarily a good thing.
But you had this vision, and you were able to pursue the business aspect at University of Massachusetts, and you took the ball and ran with it and took a business school job at Virginia Tech.
Exactly.
And was that a challenge, getting that job?
No, it wasn't a challenge. It was, you know, the people at University of Massachusetts, they helped me get that my first job. So they made some of the contacts, and through their contacts, I was able to secure my first position at Virginia Tech, and I remained at Virginia Tech ever since.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like you created your own interdisciplinary network, if you will, in the development of the International Society for Quality of Life Studies. Can you tell us about how that came to be? Which really seems to be your baby, something you conceived of.
Thank you, Mike. Back in 1995, we were doing a lot of stuff on quality of life and well-being, again in the context of applied areas such as marketing and management and travel, tourism, sports, recreation, leisure, and so forth, as well as psychology, sociology, but again in much more applied areas. And we realized that we didn't have a home, an academic home. So a bunch of professors got together. We had several other conferences before that that were sponsored by other societies like the Academy of Marketing Science, such as the American Psychological Association, and so forth. But again, these conferences were sort of ad hoc. So we said, well, we need a home. So we got together and we created the International Society for Quality of Life Studies. That was back in 1995. And yes, we're very proud of this accomplishment. It's a good society now. A lot of people are doing well-being research. They have a home. We have good journals. The applied research of quality of life is the flagship journal of MIQOLS, but we have affiliated journals such as Social Indicators Research and the Journal of Happiness Studies. And again, these are closely affiliated with MIQOLS. So yeah, I feel good about MIQOLS. We also, in 2002, we managed to put together another organization, which is essentially called the Management Institute for Quality of Life Studies, again, MIQOLS. It's a public charity, and it was designed to help take quality of life science or and the science of well-being to try and implement the science in an organizational context. So how do we diffuse that science? How do we get that science utilized by managers as well as public policy officials to make a difference, make a difference in people's lives, enrich people's lives? So MIQOLS also was our creation. And also we created other types of institutions, like for example, the Community Indicators Consortium was spawned from MIQOLS. And again, the focus is very much on developing metrics to capture quality of life at the city level, or it's at urban or a community level. So a lot of organizations out there, they realize that they're doing snippets of quality of life research at their town, in their towns and their cities, and they didn't have a home. So we developed the Community Indicators Consortium to make it their home. So MIQOLS helped spawn this other organization, which is now doing very well. So, one of the things that I feel very proud of is the fact that I got involved in creating several societies and organizations that have spurred the scholarship, the research in well-being.
Very much so. And how did you go about this? How did you find the other people involved? Going back to the birth of all three of these organizations, how did you find the other researchers? They're not all in the same journals. They're spread out all over. How did you find these people and then establish a relationship?
Well, it started out by creating the network out of the conferences that were held. So early on, back in the late 80s, 1980s, as well as the early 1990s, we had several conferences that focused on quality of life issues, dealing with, business ethics, and this is where we got to know other scholars who are very much interested, because they came to our conferences and we became more than colleagues. We established friendships but before then, we had Social Indicators Research, which is a highly established journal that attracted people from sociology, psychology, public policy, marketing, management, you name it. And so it was highly introduced. And people that were publishing in Social Indicators Research came to those conferences. So this was the beginning of forming that social network, that professional network that blossomed into something that is enduring.
Are there any particular people that you felt were instrumental in helping you develop these groups you could tell us about? Yeah,
sure. Absolutely. There are people that we believe that are very indispensable. I mean, essentially they're the fathers or the gurus of the movement. And one of these people that helped us from the onset was Alex MIQOLS, for example. He's been the editor-in-chief of Social Indicators Research, and he helped us in so many ways to create MIQOLS and the journals and so forth.
A member of the Royal Society of Canada.
That's right. Yes.
One of the most preeminent
absolutely
social science.
Other people, Richard Estes, for example, from University of Pennsylvania. We have Ken Land from Duke University. On. So there are so many people of that caliber that we were able to identify with and connect with, and I believe that without them we couldn't have made it. So they were very, very much they played the role of the father figures.
And I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about some of your research and findings that you're particularly proud of? Any projects over the years that you feel good about, in addition to this wonderful birth of these interdisciplinary organizations?
Yeah. Well, I've been doing this over 34 years now. It's been 34 years. And trying to think of what to focus on, because there's so many things about what we've done that are equally exciting.
Well, you can do it chronologically if you want to, however you'd like to.
Well, that would take a long time.
We got it. That's all right.
Let me just focus on some of the things that at least is in the forefront of my mind. I think one particular achievement that I think, that I believe is noteworthy is in 2002 I wrote a book which is called The Psychology of Quality of Life. Mm-hmm. And that was followed by, a decade later, I essentially had a second edition of that book, in which I followed up. But in the original book in 2002, I tried to come up with a theory of quality of life, essentially dealing with the psychology of quality of life, that focuses on life satisfaction. And in that theory, the ideas was sort of somewhat simple, but it was designed to integrate so much of the well-being research in subjective well-being in disparate areas. And the basic tenet behind that theory is that we as human beings, we try to optimize life satisfaction. Optimize, not necessarily maximize. So we try to optimize life satisfaction within a sort of homeostatic range. If we go way up, then we try and bring it down. And if we were way down, we try and bring it up to some sort of an adaptation level. And we use psychological strategies to help us maintain that optimal level of life satisfaction. And so I was able to come up with a configuration of strategies based on the science that focuses on life domain strategies.
Yes.
And those life domain strategies, one particular theory, a mini theory in quality of life studies is what we call bottom-up spillover, which says that life satisfaction is very much determined by satisfaction from the different life domains. It's very much based on some of your own ideas, Mike, again, dealing with quality of life therapy, in which you look at life satisfaction as made up of satisfaction from the important life domains, social life, family life, leisure life, and so forth. And as a function of the importance, the relative salience of those domains, that affect travels up and ultimately determines one's judgment of one's life, or what you might call overall happiness. So this is literally a strategy that people use in order to optimize life satisfaction. But there's so many other strategies, we call them domain strategies. So there's a bottom-up spillover, there's a top-down spillover, there's a horizontal spillover, there's a compensation effect, there's balance between those domains. So people use all kinds of strategies in order to maintain a certain adaptation level of satisfaction. And then within those domains, they use, a variety of other strategies in order to, again, optimize a certain level of what you call domain satisfaction. So there are within domain strategies and as well as inter-domain strategies that people use in order to optimize life satisfaction. So that was the gist of the book, and it pulled so much research from social personality, management, organizational psychology, occupational psychology, and I was able to again put it together in some coherent form that kind of has a semblance or maybe provides a foundation of a theory of subjective well-being.
Well, it's a tremendous challenge to be integrative theoretically in the truest sense. And most people eschew that and have their own little micro theory and so that was a very grand effort on your part.
Well, thank you.
And in addition to the theory, you're saying too, there were strategies associated with these different life domains that you see as making up overall well-being. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Can you give us some kind of an example, either from management or say personal coaching, where your theory could be applied or might be illustrated?
A particular aspect of the theory actually can be further illustrated and exemplified by some of the ideas that we came up with dealing with balance, and we're using those ideas in a work-life balance context to bring those ideas to life. And the idea is very simple, and that is, for those people, we try to optimize life satisfaction by creating balance between the life domains. So say we're talking about work life versus family life. How do you balance? Because if you use resources in one domain, it may come at the expense of another domain. And therefore, if you try and maximize satisfaction in work life, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And since family life, satisfaction in family life may go down the tubes. And so how do you optimize through engagement? So one of the things that I tried to talk about, which came out in a paper that was published in the Journal of Happiness Studies.
Sirgy and Wu?
Yeah, Sirgy.
That's a great article.
Yeah.
My students love that, by the way. And they're reading it this week.
Yeah. Oh.
While I'm gone, yes. It's one of their favorite articles.
Yeah. Well,
because it's very practical.
Yeah. And the idea behind it is actually very simple. And it says that people don't put all their eggs in one basket.
Or should not?
Should not. Well, in one way, they, for those people who do it well, it's not necessarily should not, but actually do it and do it effectively to optimize life satisfaction. So not putting all one's eggs in one basket means that you don't invest so much of oneself in a single domain. You have to be involved in several domains because you can only extract so much satisfaction from a single domain. If you'd be able to be satisfied with life in an authentic sense, that satisfaction has to come from the satisfaction of a variety of needs, both basic needs as well as growth needs. And there's the only way that you'd be able to get that kind of satisfaction from a variety of needs, a la Maslow, for example, going from the physiological needs, the safety needs, all the way to self-actualization needs, is that you have to immerse yourself in a variety of domains. And by doing so, if you become engaged in several domains, not necessarily spreading yourself too thinly. If you're involved in every single domain out there, from family life to community life to spiritual life and so forth, if you spread yourself too thinly, you're not being efficient either in terms of what we call satisfaction efficiency. So there is sort of a middle of the road in which, people try to optimize life satisfaction by investing themselves in multiple life domains, but not too many, right? Not too many, to be able to satisfy enough of their developmental needs to the point where they'd be able to, again, generate enough life satisfaction to reach that adaptation level that they seek.
Yes. Now, as you talk about domains, some of our listeners will might benefit from hearing about what some of those domains are, and perhaps we may speak of them as areas of life that add to well-being or positive feelings or a sense of contentment. Can you tell us what some of the domains or areas of life that you think are important for people to consider in building a life of happiness or well-being?
Right. So the idea of a domain, a life domain, it's nothing more than the way we psychologically segment our feelings in relation to a specific sphere of activities. So when we talk about work life, social life, we're talking about, in essence, a repertoire of cognition as well as affect that seem to be coherent or related to a specific set of activities dealing with work life, leisure life, family life, spiritual life, financial life, material life. So based on the research that I've done in the context of those applied fields, some of the important life domains that seems to be consistent across many of the studies would be family life, social life, leisure life, work life, marital, or sometimes you might call it love life. That seems to be also very important. And yeah, these are the sort of the core life domain that seems to cut across a variety of situations. But there are other secondary life domains that seems to pop up here and there. Like, for example, nowadays one can argue that there is such a thing as IT life, information technology, and the way people, use the technology to communicate with each other. It's becoming so prominent that a lot of cognitions, emotions are segmented, and you can actually ask a person how happy you are with your, I guess you can call it IT communications. Some people call it different things, but you can also talk about travel life. That's becoming also prominent because people do quite a bit of traveling, and there is a segment, at least for those travelers, that is becoming so prominent that feeds into life satisfaction. And in some people's mind, you can talk about culinary life, food and beverage, and that's so important to them, and going out and having a drink with their friends, and being so specific of the kind of cocktail that they would order,
or wine, or
So although these may be secondary, but in some people's mind, they indeed are primary life domains that tend to feed into life satisfaction.
So it can be a real passion for some.
For some.
And,
so it varies as a function of the situation. So for us to say these are the universal domains, period, maybe that may be a stretch. So I'd say that there are, the important life domains is in terms of family life, social life, work life, leisure life. These are extremely important, but there are so many other domains that become prominent as a function of the situation.
Okay. So you're saying there may be some universal needs or areas of growth and basic needs that people have, but beyond that, there can be many other domains that could be unique to the person based on their personality or life circumstance.
Exactly.
And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that article, Sirgy and Wu, where you talk about other well-being researchers and theorists like Marty Seligman of Penn. And he identified these key areas of life, if you will, but in some ways missed the boat and never really talked about the balanced life,
Absolutely.
which you have really contributed to the literature.
Yeah. So Martin Seligman, he has been very forthcoming about how authentic happiness comes from essentially three, what you might call vectors. And those vectors might be, the pleasant life, the engaged life, and the meaningful life. And
Yes.
there's quite a bit of understanding of the different motives that go into these three different, what you might call vectors. And our contribution says, okay, that's great, pleasant life, engaged life, meaningful, wonderful, yes. What about the balanced life? So this is where we come in and try and make our contribution.
Well, it's a huge contribution, and I think that it's just more and more significant and important today, and particularly you talk about developments in information technology and how current workers are now on call 24/7, whatever their job is, and it's really a huge issue, I think, for everybody. So you've really put your finger on something, I think, that's going to be very important. What's your opinion about that being available 24/7 through your tablets, phones, and other IT accoutrements?
And so this is where the whole business of work-life balance becomes so important, because these are issues of modern times, and especially exacerbated, well, maybe that's the right word to use, exacerbated by the increasing use of the new IT technology. Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So, so your advice to young professionals is to try to have time when you're not reachable, or you're able to invest in some other domains besides work.
Right. So the practical implication of the theory is you don't put all your baskets in, all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you don't spread all your eggs
Too thinly or widely.
all over the place. Exactly. So what you need to do is you need to invest in certain life domains in a way that is very selective, and you do it in such a way that would reflect your own passion. So you invest time and effort in those domains that ultimately will bring you the kind of satisfaction that would contribute to life satisfaction. So rather than have that satisfaction dangle by itself, what you need to do is you need to make sure that it is linked to the most important thing in life, and that's life satisfaction. So you have to do this in a very selective way. And
So we're not limitless energy systems.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you share a little bit in your own life what kind of domains you try to honor, and the limits you run up against in terms of maybe not being able to pursue every domain or area of life that you may have an interest in?
Yeah. In my life, work life is of course very important, but family life is very important too.
Does that include, what does that include, family life for you?
Well, I'm married and I have 4 daughters, and their lives are very important to me, so I become involved in their lives in the best way I can, and being involved in their lives enriches mine in so many different ways. But also in terms of work life, work life is very important because, this is something that is very meaningful to me. It's not like I'm doing it because I'm just a professor and this is how I earn my living. No, this is not even a passion. This is a calling. And if it is a calling, it means so much of my identity is connected to my profession, and therefore I get the kind of satisfaction from it in a way that really feeds into my life satisfaction, my overall happiness. So family life and work life, and ultimately there's the overlap with family life and social life, and ultimately love life and leisure life that comes with that. Intellectual life is something that is also very much related to. So you notice that in my case, social, family, leisure life, they're so much interconnected, and this is where I get my efficiency, what you call satisfaction, efficiency. And the same thing can be said with work life. It is very much connected to other areas that I get quite a bit of satisfaction that deals with education, intellectual life, and in some ways spiritual life is very much connected with that. I'm not a religious person, but I'm a very spiritual person, and much of my spiritual satisfaction comes from the kind of work that I do in quality of life and in business ethics, for example. So that's where I get also my satisfaction and efficiency, because those areas of my life are highly interrelated. So again, if I experience positive affect in one area, it's very likely to spill over to those other life domains. So I try to be engaged in those domains to create what psychologists call positive spillover between one life domain and another.
Well, and as you speak about your work, it does sound, I pick up an altruistic service aspect. I mean, you're kind of the Johnny Appleseed of well-being or happiness in both in general and in business. You see this as a mission, that you're trying to share these findings to improve the quality of life of others. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that my colleagues in psychology.
Go ahead.
My colleagues in psychology, when I was thinking of joining business school and becoming an academic in a school of business, some of my colleagues in psychology would say, "Oh my gosh, you're going to go to the dark side." And I tell them that what a good way to change the dark side and make it a little bit lighter.
Well, that's very interesting. So you see yourself as humanizing or reforming business colleges and education. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So
in what ways do you think you're doing that?
Our mission, those people are involved in the quality of life movement who are in business, we're trying to humanize the face of business. And we're trying to do this. Take, for example, marketing. Marketing has so much focused on profit and market share, and to a certain extent, a lot of marketing scholars have moved from profitability types of performance dimensions to what you call customer satisfaction. And you know, much of the science now is very well grounded that a lot of marketing people, marketing specialists, it says the ultimate performance of an organization should be customer satisfaction. Now, from people who are entrenched in the quality of life movement, the well-being movement, said we need to do better than customer satisfaction. We need to develop metrics of customer well-being. So it's not the ephemeral, siloed satisfaction that comes with from the satisfaction of a specific product or service, but the extent to which this satisfaction can be enduring, the extent to which that satisfaction from that little product or service can spill over to other life domains to ultimately affect life satisfaction. So we're trying to understand those conditions and those mediating factors between customer satisfaction and life satisfaction. So we're trying to transform the metrics of marketing from customer satisfaction to customer well-being. The same thing can be said in relation to management. You know, much of human performance management has focused on, you know, if you go back to theory X,
Sure.
you know.
How much work can you squeeze out of somebody?
Exactly. You know, to the idea of job satisfaction, and now we're saying job satisfaction is still not good enough. It is this spillover of job satisfaction to life satisfaction, and trying to understand those mediators and those moderators. And the ultimate dependent variable becomes employee well-being. This is where human resource managers should focus, not simply job satisfaction or job morale or job performance. We need to change the metrics. We need to change the game.
So if we in these two arenas, you're in the area of customer satisfaction, you're interested in business products and services that may impact a person's general well-being and satisfaction with life.
Exactly.
And you want to teach people in business to pay attention to that metric and think about how their products and services will impact their customers' overall well-being.
Exactly. So,
and can you give us some examples and some inspiring examples where you think that business practices have impacted or could impact a person's consumer's well-being in a general way?
Well, let me give you an example of a consulting project that I did recently related to. There's a company, a big company that is involved in corporate real estate, which is called Sodesco. It is I guess some people think that it is the parent of the Marriott. This company is trying to transform the landscape of corporate real estate in the sense that they take care of buildings. They design and maintain facilities.
Yes.
So they brought me on board to try and give them ideas how they can create strategies to enhance employee well-being by maintaining and designing buildings that ultimately would create employee well-being. So how do you, for example, create an office in such a way that would enhance not only job satisfaction but life satisfaction, right? So from the design of the facilities, to the creation of, to maintaining those facilities, to developing maybe a food facility in a corporate office to having something as simple as the lighting, soft lighting, and nice comfortable furniture that would make people feel comfortable, and they would be able to interact with each other and create a sense of social well-being apart from enhancing job performance, right? So we're talking about how do you strategize with people that are so bottom line oriented to think about employee well-being, i.e. quality of life, that would affect the bottom line. And our argument is you don't want to just focus on job performance. Job performance in the short run may be counterproductive in the long run. And if you focus on employee well-being, you will end up with positive return on investment in so many different ways in the long run.
Yes.
So that would be an example of the kinds of things that we're trying to get business executives to buy into.
Yes. And isn't there research of some positive benefits that can accrue to employees that experience increased well-being or happiness?
Absolutely.
Such as what?
Such as having a daycare center at the corporate office, allowing mothers and fathers to have their kids in a nursing facility, a nursing care, a daycare kind of facility, right
Adult
next door.
daycare.
Either,
Or adult,
it could be an elderly care facility, or we're talking about children daycare facilities.
Right, correct.
Right.
Both could be helpful.
Right.
Okay.
Those kinds of things. Something that would help them balance the pressures between work life and family life, such as telecommuting or job sharing, or having a fitness facility at their place of work. All of these programs can really make a difference in enhancing the quality of life of employees, and ultimately, in the final analysis, will affect their job performance and the company's return on investment.
Very good. I noticed I visited Google headquarters recently, and in Palo Alto, and they have sort of a Zen garden and a running path and outside exercise classes. Is this the kind of thing you're talking about?
Absolutely,
too?
yes.
And the research I was speaking of too is that happier employees are also more productive. They increase the market share. They're more creative. Any other things you can think of? I know they're rated. Customers are more happy when they interact with them.
Exactly. And sort of it takes us back to Barbara Fredrickson, broaden and build theory.
Her theory of positive affect.
How people are happy, can be creative, can be innovative, can be more engaged, can be more productive, and there's plenty of good science that have documented this. And yes, so again, positive psychology is making a huge contribution to our neck of the woods in terms of marketing and management and people in public policy.
Well, how much of this, let's just focus on the part of this that may be a feminist issue. Are you familiar with the book Lean In and things like this, talking to women about, advising them about their work life and work-life balance? Is this not a special issue for women in our culture?
Absolutely, especially women, because issues dealing with work-life balance is much more pronounced among women than men, in the sense that conflict at work, well, actually it's the other way. Conflict in the context of family for women spills over in a much more pronounced way in work life. And for men, the conflict that they experience at work spills over to the family in a much pronounced way. So there are issues in terms of gender differences. Nevertheless, both of them are affected in the way that work life interferes with family life and vice versa. But for women are less adept in segmenting their work life experiences from family life. You know, some men, for example, are much more successful in segmenting all the stuff at work is at work. I'm not going to bring it at home. But it's much more difficult for women to do that compared to men. At least this is what the evidence suggests.
And perhaps part of that is that women still have this more what we call second shift responsibilities,
Yes.
where it still falls on them to
It's still part
do
of their
child care,
their
chores,
their gender role.
caring for older. Do you have any advice for women in that quandary, or from your research, or?
Well, there are strategies, and again, the strategy that are organizational strategies that the company can put in place in order to make lives for women much more satisfying. And there are personal strategies that women can use psychologically in order to help out with that situation.
So part of it is finding a quote family friendly
That would be an
situation,
right? So that would be a way that a woman can essentially seek out those organizations, and again, managers and in the human resource department of those corporations would institute programs from, again, childcare types of facilities, job sharing, telecommuting, you name it. There's all kinds of things that can be done in the context of an organization in order to make women's life a little bit more balanced or enriching. But the advice in terms of what women can do personally, psychologically, is what men tend to be a little bit more effective at doing, and that is segmenting. What is segmentation? Segmentation is you try, if you are feeling dissatisfied at work, try and prevent a negative spillover by segmenting work life from family life. Can you put a wall between these two domains, especially under conditions in which there is quite a bit of negative affect in one life domain, so that you prevent that spillover?
Some people use the term compartmentalization.
Compartmentalization.
It's another word, perhaps.
Is definitely another way of doing it.
I wonder if it could be related to, besides inequality, maybe in the home life responsibilities, there's some evidence that women may ruminate or worry more than men do, and that may be another issue, perhaps. But then you're saying that for men, we perhaps define ourselves maybe more by our work in some ways, or for some reason there's a negative spillover that we're prone to when there's problems at work. It can spill over to our home or personal life. Is that correct?
Yeah, and those people that are a little bit more adaptive, they are much better at segmenting, or what you're calling compartmentalizing.
Okay. But they too may need an organization that's not too, what I would call, psycho-noxious or crazy making.
Right.
So at times you might need to take Johnny Paycheck's advice, the country singer, take this job and, stuff it. Or I may need to move on. Is that something you ever talk to people about?
Well, I mean, and push comes to shove, you definitely need to do that. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there are many personal strategies, psychological strategies that people can use. One of them being segmentation. Another one, which is very common, and both men and women would be able to use that, and there's quite a bit of evidence that they do that, is compensation. So let's say if you're feeling very dissatisfied at work, how do you compensate for that deficiency or that level of dissatisfaction? Ultimately, you need to maintain a homeostatic, maintain, or what you call restore homeostasis in relation to life satisfaction. So you need to do something that would compensate for the lack of satisfaction in work life, for example. Get involved in another domain that is very likely to be satisfying. So if you're not happy in work life, you just don't leave it at that. You need to compensate by being engaged in another life domain that would be enriching, that would compensate for the lack of satisfaction at work life. So you become involved in some sport or some community service or something in some other life domains that would be enriching to compensate for the lack of satisfaction that you're getting from work life.
Very good.
So that's another strategy.
Yes, I remember that's a major strategy that you suggest. And I think, too, I recall you saying that both growth and basic needs need to be honored. Can you speak about that a little bit more?
So the idea is that people have basic needs and growth needs. So if you go back to something like Dietschy's and Ryan's idea of self-determination and those psychological needs as being autonomy needs, self-relatedness needs, and competence types of needs. These are growth needs. These are the kinds of needs that once they are met, they generate much more positive emotions than the basic needs. I mean, you can meet the basic needs. As a matter of fact, it's very important to meet the basic needs, but the best you can do is minimize the dissatisfaction that may arise if these basic needs are not met. But you're not going to be able to achieve the level of positive affect that is needed for life satisfaction without the growth needs. So you need to minimize the dissatisfaction with the basic needs, but you also need to up the ante, so to speak, with the growth needs. So you need to meet the growth needs too, and meeting or satisfying those needs, basic needs plus growth needs across the full human development need spectrum is a basic recipe for life satisfaction.
And what are some of the basic needs that you could tell us about?
The basic needs are pretty obvious in the sense that they're physiological needs, they are safety needs, they're shelter needs, they are economic needs, i.e. financial needs. People need to have, because ultimately, in today's world, in order to feed yourself and feed your family, you need to have a certain level of income. So economic needs tend to interface with shelter, safety, and some of the basic biological needs, such as go to the bathroom.
And people have talked about the focusing illusion and how we can get sidetracked by one domain, particularly money, which is very tangible, and wealth.
Right.
So what you're arguing is that we need to be aware of our key growth and basic needs and make sure they're all honored in some way, where we're able to get some real satisfaction, fulfillment, set goals that we meet in those areas. And are you prepared to tell us what you think the the sine qua non are there in growth or basic needs, or will they vary too much? Can you identify the domains you think are absolutely essential? Or have you gotten that?
For growth needs?
For happiness. Yes. It's going back to an earlier question about what domains do we
Right.
really have to pay attention to
Right, yeah.
for the average person.
You know, in one of my articles, as a matter of fact, in that book that I mentioned, I have a matrix. And in that matrix, I fleshed out all the human development needs, from the very basic needs to the very growth needs.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you talk about physiological needs, security needs, safety needs, health-related needs, all the way up to what you call self-actualization or intellectual needs, aesthetic needs. And then on the other axis, I fleshed out the domains.
Mm-hmm.
So the domains would be social needs, family need, not needs, social life, work life, leisure life, spiritual life, community life, marital life, love life, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the context of that matrix, I says, well, certain life domains tend to satisfy certain needs much more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And I indicated those, obviously something like family needs, family domain, family
Mm-hmm.
life is much more related to biological needs, shelter, safety.
Mm-hmm.
So those needs tend to be much more prominent in what you call family life.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about social life, well, social life, many of the social needs are satisfied. Leisure needs are also satisfied through social life.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about something like maybe school life or educational life, well, that's much more related to growth needs. Needs related to self-actualization, self-esteem, needs related to the needs for beauty and aesthetics and intellectual growth and that kind of thing. They tend to be embedded in that particular domain. So some domains have a certain degree of affinity to certain kinds of needs, basic needs versus growth needs much more than others. So that matrix, one can actually flesh out which domains tend to reflect the satisfaction of which needs, growth or basic, more than others.
Yes. Well, that's very helpful. And one of the things I hear you saying is that there are activities related to certain domains like family life and which really affect multiple domains at once, and that can add to efficiency. So if you're getting your social needs met with your family and your love needs, and maybe you're helping your child with their homework and you're learning about Hester Prynne and the Scarlet Letter or something, that kind of overlap or double coverage, killing two birds with one stone is an old aphorism. It sounds to me like you're advocating that as well, where you can find this overlap.
Exactly. So in organizational psychologists would talk about that in terms of positive spillover.
Yes, okay.
So this is positive spillover. In the theory that we put together in terms of balance, we talk about that in terms of satisfaction efficiency. So we are trying to, again, be engaged in those life domains that overlap to the point where you are getting a bigger bang for the buck.
Yes,
so
yes,
to speak,
yes.
right?
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, we haven't talked about the area of altruism or service a lot, but it's very big in well-being circles and stuff. And do you have any thoughts about service to others? Certainly, that's an aspect of family life if you're raising a family. Do you have any other? And Seligman he talked about meaningful life, but it's really service and altruism. Do you see that as a potential source of joy or satisfaction that people need to attend to?
Absolutely, absolutely. So at the higher level of needs, and
growth needs as well.
Growth needs, exactly, is this sense to not only to belong, but to make a contribution to the larger community. A contribution to something beyond yourself.
For example, can you give us some examples?
The examples are, there's so many examples when people volunteer, for example, to help out. When they're retired and they can relax and enjoy themselves, but they choose not to. They choose to get involved and volunteer in their own community, and they do all kinds of things, from helping helping patients at hospitals, by taking care of their needs in so many different ways, to taking care of kids, to helping the poor. You name it. It's just, how do you
meet those needs in your own life?
I'm involved in so many programs in so many different ways, that again, my acts of charity is again embedded in the community, but I reach out and help my own children and my colleagues in so many different ways. It kind of reminds me of this book that I recently read by Adam Grant from University of Pennsylvania, which is called Give and Take. Give and Take. And there are those people who give, and those people who take, and those people who match, and those people who give, they give a whole lot more than take, and those people who take more than they give. He has plenty of evidence to suggest that those people who give are much more successful in life, and they are much happier for their giving, their acts of charity. And I believe that giving and acts of charity goes a long way to, again, contributing to life satisfaction. So this is a prominent growth need, and being altruistic and reaching out to help others, whether it is within one's family, within one's community, or just being friendly to the environment, is...
Very good. And this is an economist, am I correct? The author of this book?
Actually, he's an organizational psychologist.
Oh, very good. One of your ilk. So it's very impressive that they. Are there any other milestones in your work that you're proud of that you'd like to mention?
One of the things I'm particularly also proud of, and back in the late 90s, I was very much involved in understanding the relationship between materialism and life satisfaction. That those people who are more materialistic tend to report that they are not happy with their lives. So I was trying to understand this relationship, and ultimately through quite a bit of studying and quite a bit of data collection and analyzing the data, and I came up with this theory, and it was actually published back in the late 90s in Social Indicators Research dealing with materialism and quality of life. And the theory says that people who are materialistic tend to evaluate their standard of living
Mm-hmm.
differently from those people who are non-materialistic.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way they evaluate their standard of living makes them feel very dissatisfied with their material life.
Mm-hmm.
And because material life is so prominent, so salient
Mm-hmm.
in their own mind,
Mm-hmm.
they have quite a bit of negative affect invested in that domain, ultimately affecting life satisfaction. So that's why they feel dissatisfied. And it turns out that they use 3 different types of standards of comparison, 3 types of expectations in judging their own standard of living. So a materialistic person tends to make judgments about standard of living using what we call deserved expectations. I deserve to be rich. Or what you call need-based expectation. I'm constantly running out of money. I need more money. Right? Or something about, you watched the rich and famous on TV and you said, I want to be filthy rich because, a lot of people are filthy rich out there. These types of expectations tend to be used by the materialistic person a lot more than those people who are not materialistic. And when they use those reference standards in judging their own standard of living, they become very dissatisfied with their income or material life, which spills over to life satisfaction. Now, the non-materialistic person, on the other hand, tends to make judgments about their own standard of living very differently from the materialistic person. And these would be merit-based. So let's say a person who it's what we call ability-based expectation. I have much education, and based on my level of education and skill, I deserve that kind of standard of living. And if I wouldn't say deserve, no, whether my standard of living matches the level of my ability based on my education and my achievements in life. So they're much more, the expectations that they use in making those judgments tend to be much more realistic and much more grounded in reality, so to speak.
So this is what I can realistically expect from a degree in physical therapy or something like that.
Right,
okay.
Yeah. Ability
And so they're able to meet their expectations, whereas the materialist is constantly frustrated.
Constantly frustrated. Absolutely.
Imbued with negative affect and frustration.
That leads to frustration because they can't meet those expectations because those expectations are always so inflated.
Always out of reach. And don't they actually have poorer marriages too, materialists?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
How do you define materialism?
Materialism is a value that is placed on material possession and income as well as wealth in general. So those people who value material possessions and income and wealth much more so than the average person is a materialistic person by definition.
Okay. Do you also add, some people add the component of they're interested in wealth, possessions, money for its own sake, rather than for things that can buy them. Is that part of your definition or no?
Yes. What you're doing is you're making the distinction between what you call instrumental values versus terminal values. A materialistic person would pursue material wealth for the sake of material wealth. So it becomes a terminal goal rather than, I can use money to feed my family. That becomes instrumental. And again, for those people who place material possession and money and wealth and use it instrumentally to achieve other goals, they are not materialistic.
They are not. Okay, so it's more of Silas Marner or King Midas thing, where the materialist, the material possessions are an end in and of themselves
Exactly.
to those people.
Right.
Well, that's very interesting. I think that's a groundbreaking contribution, and one that I know many researchers are pursuing. And some recent research that I've been doing with Jim Roberts at Baylor suggests that maybe there may be a gratitude deficiency in materialists that contribute to their unhappiness. But whatever, it's so ironic and interesting that a business professor is arguing against the pursuit of wealth in this case. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Now, any other findings that you're proud of you'd like to highlight from your career or achievements?
There's another program of research that we have embarked, my colleagues and I, that we feel particularly proud, and that is how to capture employee well-being. And the metrics that we've developed was essentially based on the idea of the full set of needs, both basic and growth needs. So essentially we use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to capture work well-being, or what you call employee well-being. And that has led us to try and understand a whole bunch of other things, that what are the antecedents of employee well-being, as well as the consequences, dealing with ethics, yes, as the way organizations institutionalize ethics, implicitly as well as implicitly, and ultimately how organizations that have institutional ethics, both implicit and explicit, tend to have conditions that are ripe, allowing employees to feel much more enriched. And for those employees that feel more enriched, i.e. that their well-being is higher than those who are not, tend to feel much more committed to the organization, tend to be much more productive, into the organization, tend to the organization experience a lower level of turnover, and so forth. So we're making a connection between what you call work well-being, based on the idea of growth needs and basic needs, trying to understand the antecedents, and the antecedents very much related to ethics. People who work in organizations that have an ethics type of a culture tend to be much more satisfied with their jobs, with their lives, and ultimately that kind of satisfaction spills over in ways that rewards the organization.
Very interesting.
The bottom line, i.e., they perform better, they stick around longer.
So, well, there's a lot there to unpack. So you're developing measures of growth and basic needs that assess the overall well-being of employees?
Of employees, yeah. So we have those metrics in place.
Do you want to tell us the names of any of those, or how they'd be available? Or
Oh, yeah. So, people can just look at my website or just send me an email. I'll send you those articles. Those, many of those are already published. And
any that you're particularly proud of, you could mention? Any of the metrics?
There's one particular one which deals with, I think it's called employee well-being. And I forgot the title, but it's published back in the late 90s in Social Indicators Research. And this is where a lot of other organizational psychologists and quality of life researchers have picked up that metric, and they have used it in so many different ways to enhance its it's validation. So they validate in so many different contexts. So we feel pretty good about that program of research too.
Well, the other aspect, though, is the ethics. It's interesting. So you're saying that organizations with an explicit and implicit commitment to ethical behavior enhance the well-being of employees who then give better performance and are more satisfied.
Absolutely.
And why do you think that is?
Because of their self-concept. Has something to do with their...
So we're going full circle back to your original research.
Right. Those employees that are working for ethical companies tend to have an identity very much related to ethics and morality. So they think of themselves as being much more morally inclined than others. And because there is self-image congruence between the organizational image or the culture and the way they see themselves, they become much more enriched in so many different ways. They feel that the organization provides them with the resources that meets a variety of their basic as well as their growth needs, that ultimately spills over on a number of behavioral dimensions, such as performance, commitment, turnover, on and on.
Could it be that organizations that don't have that explicit or implicit ethical system also create stress and dissonance in employees that fear that they may be asked to do things and break their moral code in order to keep their job or thrive at their work?
So what you're saying, that in essence is the converse.
Yes.
The converse of this idea of self-image congruence, in the sense that, again, if they find themselves in an organization that does not have a corporate culture that matches their own identity, then that has certain negative repercussions towards quality of work life, as well as some of the behavioral dimensions such as job performance, organizational commitment, turnover.
So you're saying nice guys don't finish last? Or nice guys do finish last? In the sense of ethical nice guys.
Nice guys always, well, no, I would say nice guys win in the long run.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Are there any organizations you can point to specifically or in our society that you think have that ethical sense and imbue their employees with it, with a sense of satisfaction because of it?
There are many. The organization that I was telling you about as Sodesco, every aspect of every strategy that they try to come up with in terms of their human resource management is very much directed to just that. As a matter of fact, you go into the building there, corporate headquarters, and the word quality of life is plastered all over the place.
How do you spell the name of this organization?
Sodesco, Sodexo. Yeah, that's a good company that exemplifies the spirit of the science of well-being. Another one is Microsoft. Actually, you can actually think of Microsoft, and again, another one is Google. They've done so many good things for their employee that you can talk about how the organization provides what you call quality of life services for their employees.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, that's encouraging that they're there. Any other findings or milestones you want to mention?
I can go on forever. It's not But no, it's I think that's good. That's more than enough, I guess.
How do you wish? How would you encourage someone that wants to go into this field and maybe pick up the gauntlet where you've left off? When and if you.
Well, for those people who are in the applied sciences, whether they are in business or other fields, you talk about the other fields that are also applied, sports, recreation, travel, tourism, food, nutrition, public policy, education, you name it. In all of the applied sciences, the ultimate dependent measure should be well-being. And therefore, if one buys into the concept of well-being, irrespective of whatever discipline that they're in, those metrics have to be well established. And the various sectors within the discipline, one needs to have those as performance measures. And all their programs, policies, interventions have to be measured based on well-being metrics. The potential is enormous in terms of the science of well-being to make contributions in almost every silo, out there. And therefore, when people make those kinds of contributions to those different silos based on the concept of well-being, the world becomes a better place. I don't see how it becomes a better place, become more ethical, our society grows in a way that reaches the heights of morality, civilization notches one step forward towards greater moral heights. I can't see how we can not do quality of life studies. We cannot use the science of well-being to help us in so many different ways. And I hope that the younger generation, the new generation that is coming up, would realize that this science has so much potential and use it to the best of their ability to create new frontiers.
Well, it seems like it's an area that's ripe with possibilities, and it's a way. And you've really given your life to this area in a way that's very meaningful and altruistic. And
thank you.
Very many of us have benefited and been inspired by your work, present company included. Anything else that? How would you like to be remembered, personally and professionally? Do you have a?
Every book that I write, I have a little acknowledgement or dedication, and the dedication is to my colleagues and friends who do this kind of science. So I hope that my contribution is enough to inspire others to join us and make this world a better place.
Well, thank you for your monumental contribution and your time today.
Thank you, Mike.